Okay, let's get down to business here. All right, announcements. First thing on the agenda. All right, so this week, or next week, I should say, we do not have a workshop. We have a game jam over this weekend, right? For anybody who doesn't know, hopefully everybody knows. So that's going to be in Ellings at 6. Uh, and hopefully y'all can make it. If you have to miss some of it, that's fine. We'll probably do a quick overview of what a game jam is at the game jam this year. And I think we're also going to have some slides posted in the game jam chat as well if you have any questions about anything. Um, you're always welcome to come up and ask us any questions as well if you have anything you would like to clarify or anything like that. As always, if anybody has anything you'd like to share, please let us know. We'll set aside some time. We'd love to see whatever you're working on, if it's finished, if it's unfinished, if it's just like an art asset or whatever it is. And then also, the Game Jam dues are going to be $10. We are unfortunately at this time no longer taking any money for t-shirts. Those are ordered. Those should be in hopefully right before spring break. We'll hopefully get those back to everybody right after spring break. Is that okay? Cool. All right. So, level design and difficulty in levels. So the first things first, you want to make sure that you know what kind of game you're making. It's really important to kind of weed this out. Um, so a couple of things to maybe consider are if you're doing like a single player game, what kind of genre is it? What's your target audience? Are they expecting the game to be really, really hard, really easy, stuff like that? And then what is your motivation in these levels, right? So score, collectibles, exploration, level progression, stuff like that. Um, it's really important to just kind of keep an eye on all this stuff when you're first starting out. And yeah, let's get into some of the things you should be working on when you start making a level. So the first thing up is difficulty, right? So you want to make sure that you are making something that you want to make either way too easy or way too hard or somewhere in between. So we have two different kinds of difficulties. We have fixed difficulty, where the game is built with a specific difficulty in mind. Um, and then there's variable difficulty, where you get to choose your own difficulty, and a bunch of variables in the game change based on the difficulty that you choose. So obviously, there's pros and cons to both. The pros of having a fixed difficulty include guaranteeing that the game is very fine tuned and you have everything kind of built out in mind. You know how difficult you want the level to be, and it's going to be designed around that fact. But the con is that if you do get stuck at a certain point in the game, you're unfortunately not going to have any kind of buffer or anything to kind of help you out. There are some recent games that have kind of balanced the line in between fixed and variable. One of those games is a game called Celeste. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that game. And Celeste has a really cool option where you can turn on like an easier mode that'll let you kind of almost cheat your way through the game, but not really. And kind of give yourself special perks like not dying, a double jump, the ability to slow down time, stuff like that. But once you turn that feature on, you're now stuck in this kind of easy mode. So um, there are definitely pros and cons to doing stuff like that. As well, there's also variable difficulty, and that's always great because similar to like how Celeste does it, you get to choose. You know, if a player is having a hard time getting through the game, they can choose an easier difficulty to kind of get themselves through the levels. But at the same time, if you make a level that's designed around a specific challenge and then you make the challenge significantly easier, that might weaken your game overall. So those are just a couple things to consider when you're just first starting out, how you would like to design your game. So moving on to what kind of levels do you want to make? Theme is super important. So the first thing you should do is you sit down and be like, okay, I'm making an ice level. So we're going to have, you know, slippery ice. We're going to have icicles that fall on your head. We're going to have blizzards that come and blow the player around, stuff like that. And that's really important to do before you even start making the art for the level, because you want to see what kind of mechanics you're going to make. And then you can start prototyping those in like kind of a simple gray box kind of setting. Don't make any art for them. Don't make any crazy assets or animations for them. Just kind of test them out. See if that slippery ice really fits into your level. And in that way, you can kind of go in the circle where you just kind of take theme ideas and implement them into the game and see if they really work in your level. The next thing to kind of consider is mechanics, and that's kind of going off of the theme, right? You're going to obviously have a lot of mechanics that are influenced by your theme, but at the same time, you also are going to have mechanics that are unique, right? A spring is not maybe specific to a lava level. That's something that's going to be in your entire project. So you should make sure that you know what these are going to be and what you want them to be influenced by and what you want them to influence in your game, and then try them out. And if they all goes according to plan, you can move on to your next step. And your next step is going to be making your actual level, right? So you did all these different mechanics and you have a level theme and you're going to start kind of prototyping the level out. So the first thing a lot of people like to do is they like to draw it out in something like a piece of paper or maybe on a whiteboard, or they just kind of doodle kind of like a general design. And then after that's done, they can go in and really flesh out the level in the game itself and actually try out to see if it's actually fun to play. And it's important to do all of this before you start adding art and different assets, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to find ideas that just didn't quite stick, aren't enjoyable, even after you did that original prototyping process. And this is going to be a huge amount of feedback for you to kind of redesign your level and do any last minute quick changes and fixes. All right, so another thing you should keep in mind is progression. So now let's say you have a couple ideas for a couple themes for levels and you're kind of prototyping out some mechanics. You want to make sure that the levels are giving the player some sort of sense of progression, right? Level 1 should not feel like level, 8 or something like that. And I know that sounds really obvious, but there's more to it than just like make this level harder, right? A couple things that you should probably keep in mind is like keep the themes consistent with the difficulty of the level. A ton of games love to do this whole, oh, we have this grassy plains kind of area. Oh, it's all bright and colorful and warm and sunny. And then by the end of the game, you're in like, a castle and there's lava and everything's on fire and everybody's dying. And. So it's really important to have that progression. And it's really important to give the player some sort of accomplishment, right? I'm traveling down into the depths of this castle. I'm traveling into these badlands. I'm going somewhere, right? You don't want to be running on a treadmill. That's not fun. You want to be going on an adventure. So that's just something to keep in mind as well when coming up with level designs and themes for your levels. So here's a really good example. So I'm going to be honest right off the bat. I'm not a huge Mega Man X fan. I'm not a huge Mega Man fan in general, but this is a really awesome example. Something like this was kind of used a couple years ago at a meeting, and I thought that I would elaborate on it a little bit. So basically, in the original Mega Man X, there was an ice level for. I feel really guilty about this. I don't remember the exact man's name. I don't know. Does anybody know Freeze Man? Was it Freeze Man, Ice Man? I don't know, something like that. And he had a level where you're in like this Arctic setting, and you started out in this top left quadrant, like outside, and you're kind of running around. It's very barren. There's a couple enemies that are thrown at you, and it's relatively easy. And you're running in a very linear vertical path. As the level progresses, you actually go inside of a building, and then the building you start climbing up horizontally. So now you're going from a transition of vertical scrolling to horizontal movement. And Mega Man X is really great about that because you can do wall jumping and stuff like that. And then once you kind of clear this indoor building area, you're now back outside. And it's a little hard to see with the lighting here, but this is actually using a slightly different color palette than this original one up top. It's a little bit darker. You also get a mech, which is a nice sense of progression in the game. It's not just a visual progression. You actually like physically power up a little bit. And then at the very end of the level, you go back inside and fight the boss. So this is a really great example of like level progression within the level itself. And a couple cool ways that you can kind of do level progression inside of your levels and include some different settings and do some different color palettes and just cool stuff like that to kind of spice things up a little bit. Okay, so objectives in games and levels and stuff like that. All right, so objectives are important to kind of add some things to do in your levels rather than get to the end. One thing to kind of consider when making levels is what's your target audience, right? For example, if you're making a Zelda game, your target audience is people who like either combat or puzzles. So maybe objectives to include in your game are combat side quests and different kinds of puzzles you can solve, right? One great example would be even in a big open world game like Breath of the Wild, there were lots of scatterings of different puzzles, and those puzzles often reflected that specific area of the map. For example, the Korok seeds, if anybody who's played that game, you have different Korok seeds that are scattered around different areas. Maybe there's like a water area, so there's some sort of Korok seed puzzle involving jumping into the water or throwing something at the water or something like that to kind of incorporate that element of the level or that part of the level. These are also really helpful with different player, I don't know, bases, let's just say. So if you have really hardcore players that want to like 100% everything, you can really add a bunch of stuff to your game by just adding some objectives in your levels, like kill all the enemies or something like that will make completionist players have something to do, and will give players who aren't necessarily completionists something to come back to play and replay later on. And also casual players usually can skip these things or do them if they sound particularly fun to them, right? Hardcore player will do absolutely everything. Casual player will go, oh, that looks kind of fun. I'll go run and do that. And that just kind of gives it some great replay value. A couple examples in games that do like really great objectives and side quests are the Sonic games, right? If anybody's played those before, they often have special stages, they're called, and those are like side mini games you can play if you find the objective in the level. So here we have Sonic Mania. You have this giant yellow ring that you can jump into if you find them. They let you play kind of like a bonus mini game, and if you complete the bonus mini game, you get a Chaos Emerald. And if you get all 7 Chaos Emeralds by the end of the game, you can turn into Super Sonic, which gives you a better ending, a power up that lets you turn into Super Sonic, and an additional boss fight stage kind of setup. So that's a really cool way to give players replayability. They don't have to go and get supersonic, but if they do, they get additional content that they get to feel rewarded by, right? These aren't just like filler objectives that just kind of shoved into the game. They actually give you more content if you put in the time and do them. Does anybody have any good suggestions for games that do side quests well? Yes.
Celeste with the strawberries.
Great example.
Those are completely optional. They don't really do anything, but they're basically just like a reason for you to do more platforming, and they're like basically the same content, but like really great.
I haven't played Celeste personally, another admittance, but I have heard they do have like they do have tapes and stuff, right? And other things.
Tapes, and they also have hearts. The hearts can allow you to unlock a later stage.
Yeah, they also have those, and those have like more substantial like rewards.
And yeah, those are more puzzle based.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So then we have some objectives that give you additional content. We have objectives that give you additional rewards. So that's again some great ways of games. Yes.
I suppose I'm not totally sure if this counts as a side quest, but the extra modes in Kingdom Rush, I really like.
I have not played Kingdom Rush.
Tower defense game, you play a stage, get 3 stars, you can replay it again, where all of the enemies are harder. Like it's a completely different like setup of enemies. You get different enemies every for each thing. And like you can do it one more time and then you can do it another more time. Like hard mode, even harder mode, you get 5 stars per stage exactly. And stars are used for upgrade points. So after a certain point that becomes not very useful, and you're just doing it to get more stars.
Right.
Stuff, it can be nice to go back to earlier stages and play them on the higher difficulties to get more upgrade points to the later stages if you're having trouble.
Oh, that is a genius way of doing it. That is a genius way of doing it. You get the replayability value, you get bonuses for doing harder stuff. It doesn't have to necessarily be a quote unquote side quest. It can be something like that example where you have some sort of objective to go back and revisit things and play levels again and stuff like that. So that's another great example of how to add some content to your game and add objectives for those hardcore and casual players to enjoy. Are there any others anybody would like to throw in?
You already mentioned it for Zelda.
Yes, it's another great example. Tons of side quests, tons of things to do on the side. I mean, yeah. Yes. All right, backtracking, the dreaded backtracking. So, yeah, not a lot of people like backtracking. So a couple ways to kind of make backtracking a little bit more tolerable would be to not make it super tedious. I know that one kind of says, or kind of goes without saying, but just try to make your levels have something to do when you go back, right? So if let's say you're playing a game where you went through a level and you cleared out a bunch of enemies and now you're in the next world, but now you need to go back to the first world, so you're going to backtrack through that level. If all the enemies are dead and all the chests have been looted and the entire level has been pretty much 100% completed, then there's not going to be much to do and the player's going to be really bored, right? So backtracking usually comes from, or the hate for backtracking usually comes from having to just walk through the world, through an empty world with nothing to do. Maybe you fight the same enemy again. This is especially bad if you're playing an RPG and now the enemies are way easier to kill, right? So a couple ways to kind of avoid that would be to just switch things up, add some new stuff, and you go back, add some additional stuff that you couldn't previously reach, right? So maybe you got to the end of your game, you got like a wingsuit that lets you fly. Now, when you go back to the first level, there was a chest that you couldn't previously reach. You can now get to that. That's a great way to add replayability and to your backtracking, I should say. You can add fast travel. That's a great easy one, right? I need to go all the way back to the beginning of the game. Don't make the person walk all the way back if there's no reason to. Just give them a button. They hit a button. You have some cool UI design where you have a little guy run across the screen, like pick you up and throw you or something to back to the beginning of the level. That's another great way of doing it. So just make it easy, make it tolerable. If you think people are going to be bored, don't include it. And then also, just, separate your hard parts from your backtracking sections. Nobody wants to play through the really tedious, really hard part of a game more than once, right? So let's say you're playing a really notoriously hard game like Super Meat Boy. So Super Meat Boy is known for being like brutal, right? If you had to go back and play through a level again, it would defeat the whole purpose of having that sense of relief when you beat that level, right? I beat the level, I get to say, yay, I completed the level, and now I get to move on with my life, all right? Don't throw them back at that level and be like, do it again. No, you got to go back through this like 10 times. That's brutal, all right? So just have a way for them to go around that, have like a shortcut, have a fast travel system so they don't have to go through the really hard parts of your level, because it's just going to make people really upset if they have to do it. You can make it optional for those masochistic players, but do not make it required. Wow, that font just smeared itself.
The same thing happens on
With the
Yeah.
provide an example of bad backtracking.
Yeah, sure.
I believe the new Crash 4 game has a horrible, for the base game, it's good. It's enjoyable, but according to a lot of reviewers, so I can't actually say this from my own personal experience, there have been times where if you want to 100% the game, you have to go through the level as like every character, and that can take multiple tries for each level. And then there's also an alternate version of each level, so you'd have to do that 2 times the normal amount that you had to do for each character. So it's a lot of backtracking, and a lot of people didn't like that part of this, the 100%.
Right.
In Mario 3D Worlds, where to get 100%, you have to beat every level with all 5 characters.
I was going to actually bring that one up. I'm glad you brought that up. You have to go and play the exact same level, and you have to touch the top of the flagpole with all 5 characters. So if you beat the entire level with Mario, and you miss the top of the flagpole, you land like slightly lower, you then have to go back and play it again and again and again until you get it right. And then you got to do it 5 times with all 5 characters on every level in the game. It's brutal. It's brutal. Don't do that.
Just do it 5 times.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you
I'm
have to
going
do
to
it once.
bring up an example of backtracking that is, I think, good, and I think is also in the rush. Because those characters I was mentioning earlier, they're sidetracks. You're playing the same level again.
Right.
It's the same map. They didn't have to make a new map for every one of these side quests, but you should get different enemies. And I think that's kind of good, because every time you play on that map, you gain a better understanding of how it works, like where it's what powers and stuff. Like sometimes, like I beat one of the beat the campaign, and I was like, I'm gonna get every star in the game. And then I was like, sometimes it's easier if I haven't played a level in a really long time, and I want to get the later, the harder versions of it, I will go back and play the main 3 stars version of it just to get a better idea of the level.
Right, and that's another great example of like level memorization, right? So you played through the level, you know all the good spots now because you've memorized kind of the patterns and what's going to happen within that level. So that's another great way to add to backtracking, because now you know where things are going to be, so that will give you an edge when you do have to go back to that level. So that, thank you, that's another awesome example of good backtracking in video games. So I'm going to talk about now my personal favorite backtracking example, which is from a game called Wario Land 4. So Wario Land 4 is a game where you run to the end of the level, and then when you get to the end of the level, you hit a timer that now runs while you get back to the beginning of the level. So it's a really cool design mechanic, and we don't really see it a lot in video games anymore, but I think this is a really cool example of how to do backtracking really well in a video game. So here is an example of a Wario Land 4 level. This lower blue area is actually the same level as this upper red area. So how this level works is there's basically like a lava level that you go into, and you run starting at the top left all the way to the right, and those kind of like pink long chambers here in the middle, these are just kind of bonus rooms, so you can kind of ignore these. But you start up here, you run across, you get to this blue area where you go here. This is actually I'm sorry if I'm blocking stuff, but this is actually the same room. So when you hit the timer at the end of the level, the whole level freezes over. So you're in a lava level, now it's freezing into an ice level. And then you can run back to the beginning of the level, but now the mechanics of the level have changed because now everything's icy instead of on fire. So let's look at a specific room example, and I apologize that it's really blurry. Unfortunately, this game is really old, and not a lot of people have like really good, clean images of it. But we can look at this fire kind of area. You start at the left, and you're going to run to the right. So you have these yellowish fire pillars that kind of spring up from the lava that you have to jump over. And you can get down to this pink pipe, which goes to one of those bonus areas that I mentioned before. And then you kind of run to the side, and then you go up this ladder into this door. And that's kind of just the gist of that. But when the level freezes over, now you're going to start on this side, come out of this door, and you're going to come back. But now you'll notice that these red fire pits are kind of like blued out because they've frozen over. So now they're actually going to add as like work as blocks, and they're also going to work as platforms that you can jump on. So here, there is actually a chest that would be in both of these. The guy already got it in this one, but you can't get to it anymore, right? So if you missed it on the way there, you can no longer get to it. So you'd have to replay the level to get that specific chest. In this example here, there's a door here. Here there's no platform below it. So in Mario games, you can't go into a door unless there's like something to stand on to go into the door. Here, this fire pillar has frozen over here. So now you can stand on it to go in through the door. And then here at the very end, if you go past the door, because you remember that there's this gem you couldn't reach before, you can now jump on this frozen platform and get the gem. So this is like, again, a really awesome example of a game that does backtracking really well. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of the levels aren't this creative, but I thought this was a really good example of a level that you can use to take inspiration from. So I recommend, if you're going to make a backtracking game or a Metroidvania of some sort, I really highly recommend looking into this game to kind of get some ideas and stuff like that. Okay, so just kind of some general tips for level design. So make a learning area, kind of like a safe space to get comfortable with the mechanics of the level. Let the player kind of play with those mechanics then, right after they get introduced. Then take those mechanics that you let them play with and actually give them a challenge to get through. And then add a surprise twist at the end. And this is largely Nintendo's kind of strategy when making games, right? So if you look at a stereotypical Mario level, you have something like some sort of spike ball, right? So the first time you see the spike ball, it will fall into an area that you can't even get hurt by, right? So you just kind of see the spike ball, you see how it moves, it'll kind of roll around, it might take out some enemies, and it'll kind of be like a safe example of like, here's a spike ball. And then you'll go to the next area and they'll have a spike ball that you now have to jump over, but it'll be really easy, right? The ball will like really slowly roll at you, and then you can just kind of jump over it, and you're like, okay, I understand this challenge now. I've seen it without a danger. I've had a little bit of danger, and I've gotten through it. Now you can add the challenge of the spike balls, right? So now you can actually have a part where you have all sorts of spike balls of different sizes coming through, and you got a platform over them, and it's cool level design. And then at the end of the level, you can add some sort of crazy surprise, right? So now that they are really adapted to this spike ball, you can have moving platforms with spike balls. You can add other mechanics from previous levels. You can have spike balls that fly. You can have spike balls that, I don't know, crash through the ceiling and drop on you. You get crazy stuff. Because you know the player has the fundamentals down. To have gotten this far in the level, they now know how to deal with the spike ball. You can now throw any twist that you want with the spike ball in there. And that's really important to kind of keep in mind when you're designing levels. Don't throw a flying spike ball at them right off the bat, all right? That's not fair. Give them time to learn. All right, so now we're going to go into the first tutorial level, because this is like huge. This is really important to kind of learn about and get experience with. This is also going to make or break your game in some ways, because a lot of studies have been done on video games regarding people's attention span to video games. And one thing that they've learned is that when somebody sits down with a video game for the first time, you get about like 5 minutes to really suck the player in, right? So if you bring your game to a showcase or you give somebody a demo of your game, you only really got 5 minutes until they start to really zone out of your game. And at that point, now they're zoned out. Now it's going to be even harder to get them hooked on your game. So making a really effective, not really boring tutorial and really letting the player understand the mechanics really well is really, really important in a video game. And I also, let me just say really quick, I apologize that I'm using a lot of platforming references. Those are just the easiest ones to kind of explain. All this stuff does apply, and when I get to the very end, I'll kind of bring it back around to maybe some 3D examples and stuff like that. Okay, so teaching the player. So is the game intuitive from the start, right? So Mario obviously is very intuitive, especially the very first game, because you only had 2 buttons and a directional pad to move around. So a lot of the people could just sit down, you can hand them the controller, and even if they just kind of hit buttons, they'd eventually figured it out. But with a game like Civilization, you have an entire keyboard, you have a mouse, you might have some other peripherals strapped to your body, I don't know, right? And then the game itself has like all these bells and whistles, all these different menus, all these different trees, there's pop-ups that happen when you do certain actions. It's really hard to understand. With Mario, you can kind of just throw the player in. But with Civilization, you're going to have to at least explain the bare minimum to kind of get your players kind of interested and understanding of the game. So that's a really big distinction. And I know a lot of people on YouTube are always like, tutorial bad, do not make tutorial. That's so wrong. Like, please have something, especially if your game is like an RPG or something that's too complicated to kind of pick up off the bat. And then also do playtesting, right? So let people boot up your game, let them play the tutorial, and just get some feedback on it. Was it boring? Was it too slow? And then ask them questions like, have you played a game like this before? You know, how long did it take you to think of these answers? You know, just general questions like that to just kind of get some feedback and flatten some things out or straighten some things out that need fixing if you need to.
I literally just said Cuphead out loud. I'm like,
Yeah,
it's a real.
I had to include that one. So anybody who doesn't know, basically there was a game reviewer that was trying to play the Cuphead tutorial, and it clearly says jump and dash, but the guy was like jumping, and then he was trying to double jump, and he couldn't do it, and then he would like dash without jumping, and then he tried to at one point jump and dash, but he didn't quite make it. So then he was really confused, and you can see him like running around, and it's like they gave the guy like 10 minutes of gameplay to play early, and everybody was super upset because this dude wasted like 8 of those 10 minutes doing this basically. So yeah, and you can blame the guy all you want, but I'm going to take the side of the game designer here, and I'm going to argue for him and just say that like if somebody is struggling that much, especially somebody who plays games for a professional career, okay, you probably goofed up somewhere. So, you know, if I'm going to make this criticism, how would I personally fix it? if he tried to jump and dash, if you have a player try to do that thing and they don't get it, maybe you have something light up on your screen, do something to kind of say, you were close, try again, right? Because this is apparently really, again, I haven't played Cuphead. This is a really hard jump to make. I've seen some people miss it before. It's okay, is it not? Okay.
I played it with my friend, did it first try. I'm like, oh, is this a fatal jump? He's like, yes.
Okay.
There was a clip where they put their 4-year-old up against the game reviewer, and the 4-year-old did it like half the time, maybe like a quarter
I
of the
think
time.
that's just
I think it's just, you know,
does not play platformers.
I can understand why you might not have been able to do it. Maybe the game developers maybe need to provide a video of like something like that to show, hey, this is exactly how you need to do it.
That's another great example. You have to kind of keep your audience in mind when you're making these games. If you're trying to bring in a really broad audience, right? So Cuphead was trying to get people in that didn't necessarily play platformers because people thought the game looked cool. So it's really important that they, tell people that A is jump, right? If somebody plays platformers a lot and you're making it specifically for the audience of platform gamers, you don't probably need to say that A is jump. They'll figure that out. But in this case, obviously you need to have something like that. I don't know. Maybe it was really easy. I don't. I could be totally wrong on that. Yeah, and that's really about it about tutorials. Does anybody have any examples of good game tutorials they would like to share? Let me help you out. How's about a game that you didn't think had a tutorial, but might have actually had a tutorial now that you're kind of thinking back? Yes. Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
Great example. Great example. That starting plateau area that you kind of spawn on, that's actually a tutorial, right? That's the reason they lock you up there. And they're like, you can't leave. Because everything you need to know to complete the game, you will eventually learn by just running around up there. And then when they let you out into the big sprawling world, you now have experience doing all the things you're going to be doing over the next however many hours you play the game. Any other one? Yes.
I guess I could argue Celeste again. At the beginning of the game, you learn how to jump, you learn how to climb, and there's a part where you're crossing a bridge, and the bridge starts collapsing, so you start moving forward without falling off the map, and you try and make a jump, and the bridge falls below you before you can make the jump. So just before you're about to fall into the pit, the game practically freezes, and a bird flies down to you, and he says, "Oh, by the way, this is how you dash." And then that's how you learn how to dash. Yeah. And those are the 3 moves you use for the rest of the game.
Right, and that's another great example of a really memorable experience that's going to stick in your mind too, making the tutorial a little bit more exciting, right? You fell off the bridge, you're like, okay, I'm going to die, right? So you have that moment of panic or something that will really get your mind racing, and then you give the person the answer, and that's another great way of kind of making it a really great way to remember that mechanic and remember that tutorial and just make a good tutorial overall. All right. So this is not a tutorial. All right. I don't know. Anybody who played Xbox 360 games back in the day? This was like the plague, right? Every game had this. They would throw these up. They would throw this up on like every single game, and they would just kind of be like, yeah, that's your tutorial, right? You ever need to figure something out? Hit the pause button, and this will pop up, and then you can figure it out. And that's obviously a problem because if you don't know where the pause button is, then, what are you supposed to do? Also, another big fun thing they love to do was like put this on the loading screen, right? So this would like flash in front of you for like a minute, right? And you'd be like, A is jump, up is up, and then like the thing would disappear, and you'd be like, okay, I don't know what like any of this other stuff just said. So that's not a tutorial. Don't just give people a list of buttons that they can press. Teach them, have applications, have different ways to actually learn this stuff. Okay, so this is the part. I kept thinking I was coming up to this part. I wasn't quite there yet. So this is a great example. Mario, right? Everybody's played this game. And I'm assuming most people have gotten past the first Goomba, right? So the genius part about this setup right here is that you've got this enemy that's going to be moving towards you, and you can run right and left, right, if you hit the buttons, but nothing's happening. You can press the B button, which lets you run, but you're not going to get past the Goomba. So you're hitting all these buttons, and then you press A, and you notice that you jump, right? So even if I never pressed A and the Goomba walked over and hit me, I'd die. So I'd have to try again. And you're basically stuck here until you figure out that the A button makes you jump. Now, on top of the Goomba moving towards you, you've also got this question block here. So maybe you go to jump to get over the Goomba or land on top of it, and you accidentally hit this block. Now you know that you can hit blocks while jumping. So this is like a really basic, really early tutorial that was built into an early video game. And it seems like a really simple setup. And one of the reasons I actually don't like to use it is because we don't really know that was intentional, right? Like Miyamoto did not come out and say like, yes, I designed the first Goomba in Mario to teach you. And they're like, no, we don't know that. But there is a guy who did talk about that in his game, and that was Edmund McMillan in his game Super Meat Boy. Yes.
I'm not sure you heard this story, but I think Miyamoto said in an interview that like the last, the first level of Mario is actually the last thing they did in the game.
Was it really?
Yeah, because like they were thinking like how do we teach the players? Like they made the whole game and then like okay, let's do the first one and now it's like they thought about it.
Okay, well then I take back what I said. He did say that.
Although
I did
feel
not know
like
that.
the tutorial is kind of pointless now because at this point everyone knows you can jump over enemies.
I wouldn't say
Right. Well, that's why in a game like Super Meat Boy, this was an Xbox 360 game. It was an indie game made by a guy called Edmund McMillan. You might be more familiar with some of his more recent works, like The Binding of Isaac or The End Is Nigh, or something like that. But this was like his big, massive success. And in this game, the title Super Meat Boy doesn't really tell you what the game is about. And it was during a time where a lot of people were playing Xbox 360 games, so most gamers at the time were playing Halo and Call of Duty and stuff like that. So there was a chance they'd never really gotten into platformers. So because of that, he had this really rudimentary introduction system and these really basic first couple of levels. And I'm just going to be going through them. And for the record, I'm going to mainly be repeating what he basically said himself. So this is an abridged version of the developer explaining how he designed his level. So in this very first level, he mentioned that you would start on the left side, and you would know that you want to get to Bandage Girl, which is at the top middle. And in doing so, you would hold left and right, and you would know you can move left and right, obviously. And then you would hit the slope, and you would be able to move up the slope. And then you hit this wall, and you wouldn't know what to do. So you'd mash buttons on your controller, and you'd eventually hit A, and you would jump up the wall. So you'd say, okay, I know how to jump up the wall, but now I'm over here, and I need to go to the left. So now, if I, for example, never even bothered to go left on my control stick, I would now have to know to go left on my control stick and press A, and now I'm getting to Bandage Girl. And that sounds super basic, it's super rudimentary, but you'll see how that kind of fundamental kind of builds upon itself in the next couple levels here. So let's move on to the next level, which is this one. So here we've got a pit. So now in the first level, you didn't have any sort of hazard, but now you do have some sort of hazard. And it's important to note that the hazard isn't coming at you. There's no enemy attacking you or anything. It's just a pit. And the player's first reaction is like, okay, I know how to jump already, so I'm going to walk towards the pit and jump. And no matter how they try to time it, you're always going to fall somewhere around the middle. You're never going to make it quite across the entire pit. So now the player's going to start mashing buttons again. Eventually, they're going to figure out that if I hold the run button, which is like X or something on an Xbox controller, and I press the jump button, I will actually be able to clear the pit. And that's huge because instead of having a prompt pop up that said, hold X and press A, the player had to figure it out themselves. And they actually got an adrenaline rush and kind of like a mental boost for figuring that out, which is a lot better than obviously just like, hey, press the button. So moving on to the next level, something similar. So now we again don't have a hazard, but we have this wall here. So players are going to run up to the wall. They're going to say, what do I do? Can I fly? Can I, run up the walls like Sonic? Like, what do I do? And they're going to run and they're going to press buttons. And eventually they're going to realize that if they press A again while they're touching the wall, they'll wall jump off of it. And if they don't realize it, this level is designed so that you have to jump off of both walls to get up to the very top where your goal is. So it's a really, again, great way of kind of teaching the player, oh, you can wall jump without telling them exactly what to do. And yeah, that's that level. I think that's the last one. Yeah. Okay. I have. I don't think he talked about it there. I don't know if he did a follow-up one. And there's also like a sequel kind of movie they did, if you heard of that one. It's like indie game after the movie or something like that. Yeah, but anybody who's interested in game development, I highly recommend indie game movies. You get a chance to watch that. It's a great kind of like documentary about like really early indie game development and what that was like for the developers. Yeah. So this is a game called Cave Story. This was considered one of the very first kind of like big indie game successes. And all I really want to talk about with this game is just this starting room. So when you very like first boot up the game, you're immediately thrown into this room. And this room is like that Super Meat Boy level, all in one area. So in this room, there's no enemies, but there are pits that you can fall into. So if you move left and right and you fall down into the pit below, you'll have a little prompt that says that you have like a oxygen meter, and it'll start ticking down, right? So you're like, okay, if I fall in the water, I lose oxygen, so I need to get out of the water. So you'll get out of the water, and then you'll try to figure out how to get back up, and eventually you'll press A, and you'll jump back up. And on the right side here, we have this kind of like this heart monitor and this floppy disk. And if you interact with the heart monitor, I think it actually says a prompt like press E or something like that. You'll know that it'll heal you. So now you have learned about how to heal yourself. And if you go to the right and you interact with the floppy disk, it'll say, do you want to save your game? So now you've learned about saving your game. And then at the very end, you can go up to the door at the top and leave the room, and then you can start your adventure because now you know how to jump, you know about the hazard of water, and you know how to heal and save your game, which are the fundamentals basically of Cave Story. So that's another great example. And that's another great example of what's called a safe room in a video game, where you can kind of throw a player into a safe environment to learn.
If the player just goes to the door.
Well, then they're going to get completely murdered, and then they're going to get launched back in the room, and they're going to have to learn in the room again. Because the first area is a lot of enemies and spikes. And
They thought those were bad guys. That they were just stationary.
They could. But they're placed in such a way that they're closer to the player, and therefore.
That's a fair point.
And they're placed in such a way that they're not an immediate threat, right? They're not moving towards you. They don't exhibit hostility, right? The Goomba in Mario is coming at you, all right? There's a threat, all right? As a human being, we recognize that as a threat. This is just kind of sitting there in the corner away from you, all right? That'd be really bad level design to just throw an enemy over there. So the player is going to immediately recognize that, okay, this is sitting here, this is something I should investigate. And most people's curiosity will get the better of them. It's closer, they'll hop over there and they'll check it out. Hopefully.
And also it's a heart.
Right.
What's a heart in hazardous unless it's like one of those, what are they called Kaizo games where they like do the opposite of what you expect in a game.
Right. And at that point, if you're playing a Kaizo game, hopefully you know.
Hopefully you know it's a Kaizo game.
Yeah, hopefully you know how to play something like that.
I was joking. I wanted to see what you said.
Okay. So don't dwell on things too long. So if you're going to introduce a new mechanic, try to get off that mechanic when you can. And obviously some things are going to stay with you the whole game. The player's moveset, you don't have to like get rid of that. Or something like a basic moving platform. Like you don't have to get rid of those. But if you have a new mechanic, like let's go back to the Mario spike ball example. Do the Mario spike ball, throw a twist, and then move on. Mario games are great about that. They'll have a spike ball level, or they have some cool enemy level, and then you won't see the enemy, at least for a while. They might get lazy and bring them back later on with a new twist, but for like 3 or 4 levels, or 2 or 3 worlds even, you won't see that spike ball, you won't see that weird piranha plant enemy for a while, and that kind of gives the player, it stops the player from getting bored of your mechanics and stops the player from getting kind of burnt out on your game. And basically these bullet points are just kind of hitting the same way we were introducing those mechanics earlier. Wait till the player gets a grasp of it, change it in subtle ways, mix it up, and then just get rid of it and move on. Whoop. Got ahead of myself there. Okay, so we're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to try to pick it up a little bit here. But basically, going back to difficulty that we talked about in the beginning, make sure that your difficulty is very linear, right? Try not to make crazy spikes in difficulty that shoot straight up and then fall straight down. Try not to have weird curvy difficulty where you're like your game is kind of easy and then towards the middle of the level it gets really hard and then it gets really easy again and then like make it a straight line. Make it gradually get harder. It's not fun when you're playing a game and you're having a good time and all of a sudden it gets like absurdly hard out of nowhere. This graph on the right side we have here is a really great graph to show difficulty on the left and player ability on the right. And in between is the line of flow. So if you ever heard of flow before, it's basically the idea that when you're playing a game, you're basically going to be zoned out. You're going to be playing the game, you're not going to be thinking too hard. You're going to be in this state of flow where you're just kind of locked in, you're playing the game, you're having a good time. If you go way too hard, it's going to be really anxiety-inducing. Players are going to get burnt out. They're going to get tired. They're not going to want to keep playing. They're going to put the game down and they're going to go do something else. And if you make that, if you go below the flow line, you're basically going to be bored. You're going to get distracted. You're going to go do something else instead, and you're not going to keep playing the game. So you want to keep the players hopefully in that hypothetical linear flow line. Don't do that. Don't do that. In between. Don't do that either. That's really bad. Okay, so unfortunately the person is not here, but the whole reason I'm doing this talk is because somebody was asking me how to make your level designs look good. So from an art perspective, there's a couple things you can kind of keep in mind. So without going into the whole like how art looks good and how art works, I'm just going to talk about how to make things that benefit your level overall. If you want to learn about how to make your levels pop or have the color palette right, that's all something you should look into just art in general. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go over all of that right now, but a couple of things to keep in mind. Make sure your color scheme blends together well. So that's kind of going into that kind of art color palette kind of tangent. Make sure your character stands out. If you have a blue background, make your character a color that stands out against blue, like orange or red or yellow or something like that. Do not make them a different shade of blue. They'll just blend right in. Make the background darker. Make a way for your character to differentiate from the surroundings. That way it's also easier on the player to kind of keep track of where you're at. If you're going to have repeating assets, really good examples like a tile map, make sure you have various tiles to kind of break things up. So if you have like one grass tile, add a couple variations to that tile, make sure you can flip the tile around and just make it so the player is not obviously recognizing patterns in the way your level is. And that kind of helps make the level look, a little bit more unique and makes it look more organic, which I'll go into in a little bit. But like if you look at, I'll choose the laser pointer again. If you look at like the Fez example here, they have these blocks. You can see that these blocks are kind of randomized in the way they're kind of placed. It's not the same block. And then you also have this grass that's growing on top, and that's all kind of growing over it in different ways, and they got little different grasses sticking up, and that makes it less easy to just kind of be like, okay, it's the same block, over and over and over again like Minecraft. It helps it stand out and look more organic and look better. If you're gonna do lighting, which is like the 3D example in the middle, something like Dark Souls, don't make it too bright unless you're in a kind of level that's supposed to be bright or something like that. Just make sure your lighting level is complementing not only the level mechanics, but also the overall aesthetic of the level that you're trying to achieve. That's really important. If you have a really creepy, dark level, don't have it really bright. If you have a really, sunny, fun level, don't make it really dark, right? It sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many games tend to goof that up sometimes. And then the very last one, this is my personal favorite. Just add a bunch of animations and stuff to make your levels feel alive and exciting. these are some great examples here. So we got Hollow Knight on the left with bugs flying around in the background, water dripping. The lighting is kind of ambient and it kind of flickers. And on the far right, we got Fez, which has this light shader that makes it look like leaves, like sunlight's coming through leaves and moving around from the wind. And then you got a fox jumping over a dog and a butterfly flying over the player. And those, you don't interact with those. Those aren't NPCs or anything. Those are just, cool looking, lively things that happen on the levels to kind of make the levels more alive, make the worlds feel more alive. Okay, last one, making levels look good from a design perspective. So if you're the level designer and you're not the artist, maybe you do more of the programming and stuff like that, and you're going to be the one kind of piecing everything together, make your levels look organic. So Celeste is a great example here. We've got these spiky urchin ball things, and instead of it just being like a box of spiky looking urchins, they made it look more organic, right? This doesn't look human made. It looks like it was like growing or something. So it's a really good thing to keep in mind. Make sure you're placing stuff in things that look like they could happen organically in nature. Or if you're making a really humanistic, mechanical, robotic, human-made world, make them look really non-organic. Make them look really rigid. Make boxes of stuff and stuff like that. Another thing, don't clutter your world with traps and mechanics and NPCs. Don't have like 6 NPCs right next to each other and then like nothing, right? Make sure you have, you spread things out, you make things look nice. It's kind of hard to explain that part, but just don't bunch everything up in the level and then have like a barren open wasteland around it, basically. That's really important in making things just kind of look good from a design perspective. And then the last one is just make your paths clear, right? So for Celeste here, you get this golden feather that lets you fly, so you can clearly go straight to the right and then jump and get the feather, and then you can go up this upper path here. You can grab the feather and go around this way. There's clear areas where you can travel. There's no like hidden pathways or weird things where the player doesn't quite understand what they need to do. Same thing over here on the right. You've got clear gaps and passageways, and then they even have this thing up here where there's like, a flat ceiling, and then all of a sudden there's a little gap, and that kind of hints to, okay, you can not only jump up there, but it makes it look more organic, right? It looks like something you would actually add to the room as a kind of like an in-world design element. Okay.
A lot about Celeste that you haven't played it.
I read and watch a lot about indie games, and we're running out of time. So those are the kind of general level design topics. I just want to really quickly touch back on like 3-dimensional stuff. So for example, if you have a shooter, for example, first-person shooter, this stuff still applies, right? If you've got first-person shooter and you want to have a level where you're going to be incorporating a lot of enemies and backtracking and stuff like that, you still need to have a solid tutorial that teaches you all the stuff that you need to know about the game without being too bland and cumbersome. You still need to have backtracking that has various different mechanics in it and ways to have fun. You still need to introduce your mechanics in different ways to make it easy to learn, and then move on from those mechanics once those mechanics have been taught. And all of these things are just general kind of purpose things you should try to hit on when you possibly can. Are there any questions before I kind of go to announcements and end things off here? No? Okay. Hopefully this last slide is right. Yes. Okay. Same thing as last time. Come to the game jam. It's going to be this weekend. It's going to be a blast. If you can't make it through the whole game jam, that's fine. Come when you can. Get in a group. Do what you can. And then come to the showcase at the end no matter what. Whether you're going to be participating or not, come to the showcase. Check out all the awesome stuff people make. If you want to show anything off at any of the meetings, please let us know. Our next big meeting probably isn't going to be until after break. We're going to have kind of like a chill session. We'll talk about that later after the game jam. Kind of give everybody a break. And then lastly, if you want a prize from the game jam and you haven't given us any money this year, if you've given us any money this year, you're fine. But if you haven't given us any money this year, give us $10 and you're eligible for a prize at the game jam. We'll talk more about prizes and all that stuff at the time. As always, thank you for coming. If you have any questions about anything else, feel free. I'll be here to talk. Go forth, make games be awesome.
I feel